At my 61st birthday party at an upscale club, my drunken son swung his arm and slapped me hard across the face in front of 200 guests, yelling, "I wish I were never your son." Within hours, that humiliating video went viral, racking up millions of views on social media. 35 years of reputation and fatherly love vanished in 30 seconds. Amidst the overwhelming pain, I silently picked up my hat, got into my car, and a mysterious phone call at 7 o'clock the next morning exposed a cruel lie that would change my life forever. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before I continue, drop a quick comment for me. Have you ever had to show mercy to someone who hurt you? Yes or no? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Some details are fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. What matters most is the message it carries. The slap echoed across the Hill Country Club terrace like a gunshot, and in the ringing silence that followed, my son screamed the words that would come back to haunt him. I wish I was never your son, but I should start 2 hours earlier when I was still standing at the terrace window overlooking the hill. Country autumn feeling the hollow weight of 61 years, despite the 200 elite guests celebrating behind me. Vera Caldwell had been dead 12 years, but her absence filled the club more completely than any living presence could. I could feel it in my chest, the empty space where her hand should have been, where her quiet voice should have reminded me to smile for the photographs. I was wondering if Desmond would show up. Lyle Bentley, 60, and weathered from 40 years running cattle in the hill country, approached with a bourbon in hand and concern in his eyes. He'd known me long enough to read the tension in my shoulders. So was I said. 3 calls this week, each one tighter than the last. Desmond's voice had carried that particular strain I'd learned to recognize over 35 years, the sound of a man backing himself into a corner he couldn't see a way out of. "You all right, Floyd? You look 1,000 miles away." "Just tired, Lyle. Long week." He nodded, but didn't believe me. Neither did I. The party continued around us, Austin's energy elite, mixing with hill country old money, everyone pretending the champagne tasted better than it did. I'd built Caldwell Energy Solutions from one wind turbine and a theory about sustainable profit. 30 years later, I employed 400 people and powered half of Central Texas. But standing in that room, surrounded by everything I'd built, all I could think about was Vera's empty chair at the head table. Desmond Caldwell walked through the club doors at 8:35 years old, and dressed in a rumpled Armani suit that cost more than most men earned in months. The smell of bourbon reached me before he did. Saskia Caldwell, 32, and watching from the shadows with the cool detachment of a media strategist, calculating headline value trailed 3 steps behind. She let the smallest smile touch her lips as her husband's voice rose. "Dad, we need to talk now." The conversations around us dimmed. People pretended not to watch while watching everything. "Desmond, you made it. I need $3 million. He didn't lower his voice, didn't pull me aside. Just stood there in the middle of my birthday party and demanded money, like a man ordering coffee. "$3 million, Desmond, what have you done now?" "What I've done?" His laugh was sharp enough to cut. "What I've done is try to build something without crawling to you every 5 minutes. But I need this investment to close, and I need it Monday." The answer is no. I'd said those words before. Gambling debts in college. Losses at the Fontainebleau in Miami last year. The rehab center in Arizona I'd funded twice, both times. Believing him when he swore he'd changed. "You promised you'd changed," I said quietly. "After the Fontainebleau, after Arizona, you promised. You've spent my entire life making me feel like I'm never good enough for the Caldwell name." His voice climbed higher. Guests had stopped pretending not to listen. "Nothing I do is ever right. Nothing I build is ever as good as your precious wind farms." "That's not true, and you know it." "Then give me the money. Prove you believe in me." "Belief isn't measured in dollars, Desmond." "No. It's measured in every time you looked at me like I was disappointing you. Like I wasn't the son you wanted." The hand came up fast. Faster than I'd seen Desmond move in years. "Your mother believed in you more than you deserved," I said, and that's when his control shattered completely. "Don't you dare!" The slap caught me across the left cheek, hard enough that my hat fell. The terrace went silent, that absolute quiet that falls when something unforgivable happens in public. 200 people watched my son's hand connect with my face. watched me stumble back half a step. Watched Desmond stand there swaying slightly bourbon on his breath and satisfaction in his eyes despite what he'd just done. I wish I never had your blood in my veins. Then came the chaos. Phones appeared like magic 2030, 40 screens glowing in the dusk. Camera flashes, shocked whispers that grew into a roar. Oh my God, did you see that? Someone's recording this. That's Floyd Caldwell's son, the heir to Caldwell Energy. I picked up my hat, walked through the crowd. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody spoke. They just watched, and their phones watched. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I understood that this moment, this single terrible moment, was already traveling beyond this room at the speed of light. I sat in my old Ford truck in the parking lot at 9:30, hat in my hands. The phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Notifications poured in so fast they blurred together. Then I saw it. It went viral. They called it the birthday slap. Trending number 3 in Texas, climbing fast. The video had been posted from 6 different angles. Thousands of views already multiplying every time I checked. The comments were brutal. Rich kid throws tantrum when daddy says no. Spoiled brat needs jail time, not allowance. This is what happens when you give entitled children everything. By midnight, 3 million people had watched my son strike me. 3 million. Through the truck window, I saw Saskia standing outside the club entrance phone to her ear. As I watched, she glanced at the screen, and that same small smile touched her lips. She pocketed the phone with the careful satisfaction of someone who just made exactly the right move in a game I hadn't known we were playing. 35 years of reputation. Desmond had destroyed it in 30 seconds. I sat in my old Ford truck hat in my hands and thought about Vera. Somewhere in this mess was the truth I hadn't found yet. I could feel it the way old ranchers feel. Rain coming, something in the air, something in my bones. The phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another stranger watching the worst moment of my life on repeat. I drove home in silence, the phone face down on the passenger seat, still buzzing with notifications I couldn't bring myself to read. The Caldwell Ranch sat dark and empty when I pulled up at 2:30, the 800 acres stretching into blackness, like the questions I couldn't answer. At 3 in the morning, sitting in Vera's old room with a bottle of Garrison bourbon and 35 years of family photographs spread across the floor, I finally saw what I'd been too blind to notice my wife had never once looked at our son with joy. The sitting room still smelled like her watercolors, that particular mix of linseed oil and turpentine she'd used to paint hill country landscapes. I'd left everything exactly as it was the day the cancer took her 12 years ago. Her easel by the window, her brushes in the ceramic cup, the photo album she'd kept so carefully organized on the bottom shelf. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon and pulled the first album. 200 people had watched Desmond hit me tonight. The video was probably up to 5 million views by now, maybe 10. But right now, sitting on Vera's faded Persian rug, I was looking for what she had seen. What she'd been trying to tell me in the small, silent ways I'd been too busy to notice. I started at the beginning, Desmond at 1 day old wrapped in the hospital blanket, Vera holding him, her face pale and tight. I'd always attributed that expression to exhaustion from labor. But now, studying it in the lamplight at 3 a.m., I saw something else. Fear. Vera looked terrified. Desmond at 6 months. First birthday. 5th birthday with the cowboy cake he'd demanded. 10th birthday at the ranch with his friends from Austin. Sweet 16 with the used Mustang I'd bought him. 21st with Saskia on his arm for the first time, already looking at my son like he was an investment. She was calculating returns on. In every single photograph, every birthday, every Christmas, every graduation, Vera's expression wasn't maternal pride. It was anxiety bordering on something darker. Guilt. The look of someone carrying an unbearable weight, waiting for the moment it would crush them. I refilled the bourbon. Memories came flooding back sharp and clear in the way things only become clear when you stop trying not to see them. Vera insisting she'd take Desmond to pediatrician appointments alone. You're too busy with the wind farms, Floyd. I'll handle it. Vera changing the subject every time someone mentioned that Desmond didn't look like either of us. My height, her coloring, but something in the face that belonged to neither. Vera keeping his birth certificate in a locked drawer in her desk for 35 years, never once letting me file it myself. He's fine, Floyd, she'd say whenever I asked. Children don't all look like their parents. Genetics are complicated. But this wasn't genetics. This was something else. What kind of man was I that my own wife couldn't trust me with the truth about our son? The hill country dawn came slowly, the way it always does in October, soft and gold through the live oaks. I moved to the kitchen at 6, my back stiff from sitting on the floor, my head thick with bourbon and questions. The coffee brewed while I stood at the window, watching the wind turbines turn in the distance, those silent giants I'd built to prove sustainable energy could work in Texas. I thought about Vera's final year, the way cancer had stripped everything down to essentials. How she'd seemed almost relieved when Desmond was traveling for business. How her face would close like a door whenever he came home. How she'd held my hand those last days in hospice and whispered, "Some things are just complicated, Floyd. I wish I'd been braver." I'd thought she meant our marriage, the distance that had grown between us as I built the company and she retreated into her art. But maybe she'd meant something else entirely. She'd kept Desmond's birth certificate locked away for 35 years. She'd controlled every interaction with doctors, every school form, every official document. She'd looked at our newborn son with fear instead of joy. What were you protecting me from, Vera? Or were you protecting yourself? The phone rang at exactly 7 a.m. Unfamiliar Austin number. I almost didn't answer, probably another reporter, wanting a quote about the slap, another stranger asking how it felt to be humiliated by my own son on video. But something made me pick up. "Ah, Mr. Caldwell." The voice was weak, elderly, trembling with age or illness or both. "This is Dr. Clifford Holbrook. I was the attending obstetrician at Texas Medical Center 35 years ago. I delivered your son." The coffee stopped halfway to my mouth. Dr. Clifford Holbrook. 65 years old now, if memory served. He'd disappeared from Austin the month after Desmond was born. Vera had mentioned it once years later when I'd asked about getting Desmond's newborn medical records. "Dr. Holbrook retired," she'd said quickly. "Moved somewhere up north. The records are fine, Floyd. Let it go." But he hadn't retired. He'd run. "Dr. Holbrook," I said carefully, "you left Austin a long time ago." "I did." A long pause, the sound of difficult breathing. "I saw that video last night. Your son slapping you. The things he said. It's been a difficult evening. I'm dying, Mr. Caldwell. Pancreatic cancer. 2 months, maybe 3. I've been carrying something for 35 years, and I can't take it to my grave. Not after seeing that." The coffee went cold in my hands. "What are you talking about?" "Your son." Another pause. Another labored breath. "The night he was born. What happened in that hospital? What your wife saw that made her desperate enough to—" He broke off, started again. "I saw that video. Your son screaming that he wished he didn't have your blood in his veins. Dr. Holbrook, it's time you knew the truth about your son, Mr. Caldwell." Outside the hill, country was waking up, cattle lowing in the distance, wind through the live oaks, another Texas morning like 10,000 before it. And a dying man's voice on the phone was about to unravel 35 years of everything I thought I knew. I set the coffee cup down carefully, as if the wrong move might shatter more than ceramic. "Tell me," I said. The elderly doctor's voice cracked across the phone line. "Your wife saw the baby's feet and started screaming, not crying, Mr. Caldwell. Screaming, and I knew right then that everything was about to go very wrong." I sat down hard in the kitchen chair. November 14th, 1991. Texas Medical Center. I'd been on shift for 18 hours. Dr. Holbrook's breathing was labored, each word an effort. "Your son was born at 11:42 p.m. Beautiful baby boy. 8 pounds 3 ounces. Perfect APGAR scores. Except for his feet." "What about his feet?" "Severe bilateral clubfoot. Both feet twisted inward. Not uncommon, 1 in 1,000 births. Completely treatable with early intervention. Serial casting, maybe surgery. Most kids walk normally by age 2. My hand gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. Vera took one look and started screaming. Not the normal distress of a new mother seeing something unexpected. This was hysteria. She kept saying, "He'll never accept this. Floyd built everything perfect. He can't have an imperfect son. I would never." That's what I told her. Over and over. I said you'd love your son no matter what. That you'd get him the best care available. She didn't believe me, or couldn't. She was convinced you'd look at that baby and see only failure. I thought about the empire I'd built. Caldwell Energy Solutions, 400 employees, half of Central Texas powered by my wind farms. Everything engineered to precise specifications. Every turbine calibrated to exact tolerances. Had I built a reputation so rigid that my own wife believed I couldn't love an imperfect child? In the delivery room next to hers, Dr. Holbrook continued, was an 18-year-old girl, Roxanne Whitfield, alone, no family, no partner, no one waiting for her, and her baby was perfect. The words hung in the air like smoke. Vera saw her through the window between rooms, saw the healthy baby, and she made me a proposition. Jesus Christ. She said if I brought that baby, your biological son, with the clubfoot, if I put him in your arms, she'd take the scalpel from my tray and open her wrists right there in the delivery room. I stood at my kitchen window looking out at 800 acres I'd built with my own hands and felt profoundly small. She meant it, Dr. Holbrook said quietly. I've delivered 3,000 babies in my career. I know the difference between a desperate threat and a promise. That was a promise. And the money, $50,000. More money than I'd ever seen. I was drowning in student loans. My wife had just been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. We needed specialized care I couldn't afford on a resident's salary. He paused. I'm not making excuses. There is no excuse. I'm just telling you what I told myself at 3 a.m, while 2 exhausted mothers slept, and I held 2 newborns and made the worst choice of my life. You switched them. I switched them. Changed the ID bracelets, changed the birth certificates, took Vera's cash and put it in a safety deposit box where my wife never found it. And I left Austin the next month because I couldn't look at myself in the mirror anymore. The sun was fully up now, Texas light streaming through the kitchen window, illuminating a world that looked exactly the same as yesterday, but meant something completely different. Your biological son is Stellan Lockwood, 35 years old. He lives in Orlando, Florida. He's a special education teacher. He walks with a limp, Mr. Caldwell. But he walks. 4 surgeries over 6 years. Physical therapy twice a week for a decade. And he walks. And Roxanne Whitfield, the girl you gave my son to, she knew. Dr. Holbrook's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The blood types didn't match. She must have figured it out during one of the early surgeries. Type O baby. Type A. Mother. Impossible. But she never said a word. She knew and kept him anyway. Loved him anyway. Through 4 surgeries. Years of therapy. She worked 2 jobs to pay for treatments insurance wouldn't cover. Raised him alone. Never married. Never asked for help. Just loved that boy like he was hers because she decided he was. Where is she now? Dead. This past August. Cancer like your Vera. Maybe if she'd lived, she would have told Stellan the truth. I don't know. I just know she showed more courage than I ever did. The phone line went quiet except for Dr. Holbrook's ragged breathing. I'm sorry, he said finally. I saw that video of your son hitting you. Heard him scream about not wanting your blood. And I thought you deserved to know that he got his wish. He doesn't have your blood. He never did. The call ended. I sat motionless in my kitchen, the coffee long cold, watching dust motes drift through morning sunlight. 35 years. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every time I'd held Desmond, wondering why the connection felt forced, why the love felt like work. Vera had been holding this secret like a knife to her own throat. Then I remembered her office upstairs, the safe she kept locked behind the Texas Hill country landscape painting she'd never quite finished. The one she'd hang and then take down and then hang again like she couldn't decide if she wanted to hide what was behind it or make it easy to access. I climbed the stairs. The painting moved easily on its hooks, a watercolor of live oaks at sunset beautiful and sad. Behind it, the small wall. Safe. I'd opened it exactly 3 times in 30 years once, when she'd asked me to store her grandmother's pearls once, when she'd put in her will once when I'd retrieved that will after she died. The combination was our anniversary, June 12th, 1988. The lock clicked open. Inside, behind the pearls and the will and the deed to our first house, a small, leather-bound diary, the kind Vera used to sketch watercolor ideas in, but this one had no paintings, just a brass lock and the weight of years. The diary fell open to the last page, her handwriting shaky from the morphine near the end. Floyd, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and maybe that's mercy. I tried to tell you 1,000 times. I tried to be brave enough. I wasn't. Forgive me if you can. I never could forgive myself. I found a letter opener in her desk drawer and wedged it under the brass clasp. The lock broke easily, like it had been waiting 35 years to give up its secrets. The first entry was dated November 15th, 1991, the day after our son was born, and Vera's handwriting shook so badly I could barely read it. God forgive me for what I've done to both my babies, the one I kept and the one I gave away. I sat on the floor of her office, the diary open across my knees, and read words my wife had been too terrified to speak aloud for 35 years. I saw his feet, and I knew. Floyd has spent 40 years building perfect things. Every wind turbine calibrated to exact specifications. Every contract negotiated to the decimal point. He cannot have an imperfect son. He would try to love this baby, but every time he looked at those twisted feet, he would see failure. I cannot let that happen. I cannot let my baby become a disappointment to the only man I've ever loved. I wanted to throw the diary across the room, wanted to scream at a dead woman who'd made assumptions about my capacity for love, based on my capacity for engineering. But I kept reading. The girl in the next room had a perfect baby, Roxanne Whitfield, 18 years old, alone. No family waiting, no one to question. She won't know the difference. And my baby, our baby, will have the father he deserves. A man who won't flinch when he looks at his son's feet. You were wrong about me, Vera. You were so goddamn wrong. I flipped ahead, scanning entries from different years. Birthdays, Christmases, graduations. Each one documenting Vera's anxiety, her guilt growing like cancer, long before the actual cancer took her. Desmond's 5th birthday today. Floyd gave him a toy wind turbine. Des threw it against the wall and screamed that he wanted a motorcycle. I saw Floyd's face, the disappointment he tries to hide. And I think, what if I'd kept the other one? Would he have been grateful? Would he have smiled at his father's gift instead of breaking it? Desmond's 16th birthday. He wrecked the Mustang Floyd bought him. Floyd's jaw was so tight, I thought it would crack. And I think somewhere my other son is 16 too. Does he smile when he receives gifts? Does he thank the woman who raised him? Then halfway through the diary, the tone changed. I found him online. Special education teacher. Orlando, Florida. Stellan Lockwood. He has my smile. Vera's smile. And he walks with a limp, not badly, but you can see it. 4 surgeries when he was young. I looked at his photograph for an hour and cried. She'd been watching him for years, monitoring from a distance. He teaches children with disabilities. Children like he was. Like I feared Floyd would see as broken. And I realize now I didn't give him to another family to save Floyd from disappointment. I gave him away because I was the one who saw him as broken. I was the one who couldn't imagine loving an imperfect child. And I gave him to a woman who could. What kind of love makes you destroy your own child's life to save him from imaginary disappointment? The final entry was dated 3 weeks before her death. The cancer is everywhere now. The morphine makes it hard to write. But I need to say this while I still can. The mistake I made in 1991 wasn't just about fear. It was about the kind of love that thinks it knows better than God what a child needs. I thought I was protecting both boys. Instead, I gave my biological son to a struggling teenager and raised another woman's child with resentment I tried to hide but never could. Fear dressed up as protection is still just fear. God forgive me. I closed the diary and sat in the silence of Vera's office, surrounded by her unfinished paintings and the weight of her confession. At 10 a.m. I called Brent Thornton. Brent Thornton, 55, and my attorney for 30 years, answered with the calm efficiency of a man who'd handled enough hill country crises to expect anything. Brent, I need you to trace a payment from 35 years ago. Good morning to you too, Floyd. What payment? $50,000, cash, paid to Dr. Clifford Holbrook in November 1991. I need to know where it went after he received it. Silence. Then, Floyd, what's going on? Just find out where the money went, please. 2 hours later, he called back. The entire amount was transferred to an anonymous orthopedic surgery fund at Texas Children's Hospital. December 1991. The fund still exists. It covers surgical costs for children whose families can't afford treatment. My hand tightened on the phone. Stellan Lockwood. Check if that name appears in the recipient records. Floyd, please, Brent. An hour after that, my phone rang again. 4 surgeries, Brent said quietly. 1993, 1995, 1998, and 2007. Every single one paid for by that fund. Your money. Vera's money, it saved your son's ability to walk Floyd. I stood at the window looking out at the ranch Vera and I had built together and felt something shift in my chest. She'd made a terrible choice, but the money she'd used to make it had circled back around some strange kind of karmic justice I didn't understand, but couldn't deny. Brent, I need one more thing. Book me a hotel near Sunshine Special Education Center in Orlando. Tonight. You're going to see him? I need to see him with my own eyes. I packed an overnight bag and loaded it into my old Ford at 10:30. The October heat had made me leave the office window open to catch the breeze. I didn't know Desmond had shown up at the ranch to apologize, or more likely to try once more for the money he'd demanded. I didn't know he was standing outside that window hungover and desperate when I made the call to Brent about the Orlando hotel. Desmond heard every word. Orlando. Dr. Holbrook. Sunshine Special Education Center. He stood in the Texas heat with his father's words drifting through the open window and thought, what the hell is in Orlando, and why is he talking about the doctor who delivered me? Something was wrong. Very wrong. And whatever secret his father was chasing was worth following. I didn't see the black Escalade pulling out of the ranch road behind me. I drove toward Orlando with Vera's diary on the passenger seat, and a name I'd never heard before yesterday, Stellan Lockwood, my son, the one I should have raised. Somewhere 3 hours east, a man with my blood and Vera's smile was teaching children how to walk. And somewhere behind me, closer than I knew Desmond was following, already calling Saskia with suspicions he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. Desmond kept the black Escalade 3 cars back on I-10, watching his father's old Ford truck cut through Texas morning traffic like a man was somewhere urgent to be, and Desmond intended to find out exactly where that was and why it mattered enough to make the old man run. He called Saskia 20 minutes into the drive, the phone on speaker, as he navigated around a semi-truck. He's headed east, fast. I heard him say Orlando through the ranch office window. Saskia's voice came through cold and clear, that calculated tone she used when she was already 3 moves ahead. Follow him. Document everything. If he's looking for something or someone, we need proof before he makes it legal. What if it's nothing? What if Orlando is just business? Men don't drop everything for business after viral humiliation. Your father's running towards something or away from something. Either way, it's leverage. Call me when you know more. The line went dead. Desmond drove in silence, following the truck that carried his father toward a secret Desmond couldn't name but could feel growing larger with every mile. In the Ford ahead, I drove east with Vera's diary on the passenger seat and Dr. Holbrook's words still echoing in my head. Stellan Lockwood, 35 years old. My son, the one Vera had been too afraid to let me love. The one she'd watched from a distance for decades, carrying guilt that eventually turned to cancer. I didn't know my other son was 3 cars behind me, tracking my every move. 200 yards away, Desmond sat in the Escalade with the air conditioning running, watching his father read at a picnic table, hunched over something that looked like a small book. The old man's shoulders were shaking. Desmond had never seen his father cry. By 3 p.m. I'd crossed into Florida. The landscape changed from Texas scrub to palmetto and pine. I stopped again at a rest area in Central Florida, needing to finish the diary before I arrived in Orlando, needing to understand what Vera had been thinking in those final years before the cancer took her. The coffee I'd bought went cold in my hands. Outside, Florida palmetto scrub rolled past where hill country limestone had been that morning. Everything was changing. March 2023. I found him online. He's a teacher now, special education. The Sunshine Special Education Center in Orlando. There are videos on their website. I've watched them 50 times. He's kneeling beside a child with cerebral palsy, helping her take steps on parallel bars. He's so patient, so gentle. He chose to help children like himself, like the child I rejected because I thought his father couldn't love imperfection. My throat tightened. November 2024. The cancer is back, 3rd time. Dr. Murray says months, not years. I keep thinking I should tell Floyd, that he deserves to know about Stellan before I die. But what good would it do now Stellan has built a life? Floyd has built an empire. And Desmond, God, help me, Desmond has become exactly what I feared, a man who sees love as transaction and family as burden. Maybe if I'd kept Stellan, both boys would have turned out differently. Or maybe I destroyed them both with one terrified choice. Vera's final entry, written in shaky handwriting 3 weeks before she died. Floyd, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And maybe that's mercy. I tried to tell you 1,000 times. I tried to be brave enough. I wasn't. I loved you enough to think I was protecting you. I loved our son enough to give him away rather than risk your disappointment. I loved him wrong. I loved you wrong. I loved myself least of all. Forgive me if you can. I never could forgive myself. I reached Orlando at 6 p.m. as the October sun set in brilliant orange across the flat Florida sky. My GPS directed me to a single-story building, painted cheerful yellow, with an adaptive playground visible in the side yard and warm lights glowing through large windows. A wooden sign by the entrance read, Sunshine Special Education Center, where every child shines. I pulled into the parking lot across the street and cut the engine. The building was exactly as Dr. Holbrook described it. Yellow, hopeful, impossibly far from the life I'd built in Texas. Through the large front windows I could see movement inside, someone walking with a distinctive gait patient and unhurried kneeling beside a small child. I couldn't see faces clearly from this distance, but I could see enough. 2 minutes later, a black Escalade pulled into the gas station 200 meters down the road. Desmond parked where he could see both the yellow building and his father's truck. He still didn't know what he was looking for, but he was watching. I gripped the steering wheel and stared at the yellow building across the street. Somewhere inside those walls was a man who had my blood, and Vera's smile, who'd spent 35 years becoming someone I'd never had the chance to know. Through the large front windows I could see movement, someone walking with a distinctive limp patient, with a small child. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. For 25 minutes I sat in that truck watching a stranger move through a classroom with a limp that should have been mine to help him overcome, and I couldn't make my hands stop shaking enough to open the door. Through the large front windows of the Sunshine Special Education Center, I could see everything clearly under the warm fluorescent lights. Stellan Lockwood, 35, moved through the classroom with a distinctive gait, his left foot turning inward with each step, kneeling beside children with the infinite patience of someone who understood exactly what they were struggling to overcome. He was teaching an evening program, 4 children, ages maybe 6 to 10, working with adaptive equipment I recognized from Vera's diary descriptions. Parallel bars for walking practice, specialized grips for pencils. Stellan moved from child to child, adjusting their posture, guiding small hands, with large capable ones never showing frustration or impatience. 35 years. He'd spent 35 years learning to walk, while I'd built wind farms and negotiated energy contracts. While I'd raised another woman's son in luxury and resentment, my own child had fought for every step. 200 meters behind me in the gas station parking lot, Desmond sat in his black Escalade with the engine running, watching his father watch a building he couldn't understand. "Who is that guy?" he muttered to himself. "Why would Dad drive all day to watch some crippled teacher?" But I didn't know Desmond was there. I only knew that the man in that classroom had a way of tilting his head when he concentrated on something small, a child's hand position, a shoe buckle, a pencil grip that was so exactly like Vera's unconscious gesture when she painted that my chest tightened with recognition. I'd seen that head tilt 10,000 times, the way her whole neck would cant slightly to the left, lips pursed in concentration, completely unaware she was doing it. A genetic mannerism neither of them could control, visible proof of biological connection in a gesture alone. Then one of the children said something I couldn't hear through the glass, and Stellan threw his head back and laughed. The smile started in his eyes exactly like Vera's always had, and spread across his entire face in a transformation so complete it changed everything about his features. Not similar to Vera's smile, identical. The exact expression I'd fallen in love with at a church altar in San Antonio 38 years ago on June 12th, 1988. I didn't need a DNA test. I knew. That was my son. The tears came without permission. I sat in an Orlando parking lot at dusk and wept for a man I'd never met who had every right to my name, my blood, my support for 3.5 decades, and had received none of it because his mother had been too terrified to trust his father with imperfection. I'd spent 61 years building things, ranches, businesses, reputations, but I'd never felt this fragile. At 6:28, I forced myself to breathe normally, wiped my face, made a decision. I couldn't walk in there and announce I was his biological father. Not yet. I needed to see who he was first. See if he was someone who'd want this truth dropped into his life like a bomb. See if he'd built something I had no right to destroy with my sudden claim. I would approach as an interested visitor, someone considering donations or program support, reasonable, professional. Not the desperate man who'd driven 9 hours to meet the son stolen from him by good intentions and terrible fear. The truck door opened with a creak that sounded too loud in the quiet evening. My legs felt unsteady on the pavement. I crossed the street as the October sun finished setting, leaving Orlando in that purple twilight that comes fast in Florida. Behind me, Desmond leaned forward in the Escalade, watching every move. He's going inside. Finally! What the hell is Dad doing at a special ed school in Orlando? The Sunshine Special Education Center's front door was painted bright yellow with a rainbow arcing across it in cheerful stripes. I pulled it open and stepped into a reception area that smelled like cleaning solution and crayons. That particular combination every school in America shares. The walls were covered with adaptive equipment displays, photos of smiling children, achievement certificates in cheap frames. Everything was bright, primary colors, and encouragement. This was a place built by people who believed every child could learn if you just found the right way to teach them. Behind the front desk sat a young woman who looked up with a smile so genuinely warm it steadied something in my chest. "Hi, welcome to Sunshine," she said, standing immediately. Indy Platt 25 and the center's assistant director extended her hand with the natural enthusiasm of someone who loved her work. "Can I help you with something?" I shook her hand, hoping mine wasn't visibly trembling. "I'm interested in learning more about your programs," I said, keeping my voice level. "I've heard wonderful things. We'd love to show you around." Indy's smile widened. "I'm Indy Platt, assistant director. Are you looking for services for a family member, or are you interested in supporting our work?" "Supporting," I said. It wasn't entirely a lie. I work in sustainable energy. Wind farms. I'm looking for organizations to partner with. Educational programs." "That's amazing. Let me find someone to give you a proper tour." She glanced toward the hallway where I could hear children's voices and patient adult guidance. "Our head teacher is with the evening group right now, but I'm sure he'd be happy to talk with you." "I appreciate this. I know it's evening. We run evening programs for families who need them. Your timing is perfect, actually." Indy came around the desk, gesturing down the hallway. Her handshake had been firm and warm. I realized mine was trembling. "Let me introduce you to our head teacher," she said, leading me forward. "His name is Stellan Lockwood. He's the heart of this place." My legs moved automatically, following her toward the sun I'd never known I had, while somewhere in the parking lot, outside another sun I shouldn't have raised, watched through tinted windows, wondering what secret his father was chasing hard enough to drive 9 hours into the night. When Stellan Lockwood stood from the child's wheelchair and extended his hand, I looked into my wife's eyes on a stranger's face and felt 35 years collapse into a single heartbeat. "Welcome to Sunshine," he said, and Vera's smile spread across his features exactly the way it had spread across hers, starting from the eyes, lighting up everything. "I'm Stellan Lockwood. Indy takes good care of our visitors." His handshake was firm and warm. Mine was trembling. "Floyd Caldwell. I managed. I've heard wonderful things about your programs." Up close, the resemblance to Vera was overwhelming. Her bone structure, her hazel eyes with the same gold flecks that changed color depending on the light, her exact coloring fair skin that showed every emotion, dark hair with that slight wave she'd always complained about. All of it assembled in the face of a 35-year-old man I'd never met, but should have raised. "Let me finish with this group," Stellan said, glancing back at the 4 children working at different stations around the room. "Then Indy can show you everything. We're proud of what we've built here." He turned back to his students without waiting for my response duty before courtesy, exactly the way Vera had always prioritized her responsibilities. I stood in the doorway and watched him kneel beside a girl in a wheelchair who was struggling to hold a crayon. "You've got this, Clover," he said quietly, "just like we practiced. See, your hand knows what to do." Indy touched my elbow gently. "Come on, I'll start the tour while Stellan finishes up." She led me through the center's 3 classrooms. The therapy room with its adaptive equipment, the small library filled with books in braille and large print. But I couldn't focus on anything except the man visible through the observation windows, moving from child to child with that distinctive limp, kneeling, adjusting, encouraging. Stellan has a gift, Indy said as we paused outside the main classroom. The kids trust him completely. He never gives up on them. I think it's because he understands what they're going through. He had clubfoot as a baby. 4 surgeries before he could walk normally. Well, normally enough. He seems exceptional. He is. Indy's voice held genuine warmth. That little girl he's working with, Clover Riddle, 7 years old, with cerebral palsy, and a smile that could light up a room, she was Stellan's student. When she started here 2 years ago, she could barely grip a pencil. Now look at her. I watched through the glass as Clover managed a shaky but recognizable letter on her paper. Stellan celebrated like she'd won the Nobel Prize. This is what real strength looks like, I thought. Not Desmond's aggressive demands or entitled rage. This, patience, service, building up instead of tearing down. What's Clover's family situation? I asked, not sure why the question mattered, but unable to stop myself. Single dad, works 2 jobs now. Had a rough couple years. Indy lowered her voice. He worked for some energy company, I forget which one. Lost his job suddenly right before Christmas. No severance, no warning. Just gone. The family struggled financially until they found our scholarship program. The memory hit me like cold water. 2 years ago, December 23rd. I'd been at the ranch preparing for Christmas when Desmond called from the company office in Austin. Told me he'd fired someone. I'd asked why we didn't fire people without cause during the holidays. Desmond had laughed. Because I felt like it. Because he asked for time off during busy season. Because I'm tired of workers thinking they're entitled to family time. I'd been furious. Told Desmond to rehire the man immediately. Desmond had refused, said it was already done, hung up. I'd followed up with HR, but by then the man had already found other work. I never knew his name. Never knew he had a daughter. How do you tell a man that every truth he's built his life on is about to shatter? One son destroys, the other rebuilds, and I raised the wrong one. The tour ended back in the hallway near the entrance. Stellan emerged from the classroom. The children's evening program concluded. He shook my hand again, that same firm warmth. Did Indy take good care of you? He asked. She did. You've built something remarkable here. We're trying. Special education funding is always tight, but we make it work. He smiled Vera's smile again, and my chest tightened. Are you thinking of supporting our programs? Indy mentioned you work in energy. Wind farms, sustainable power. My voice sounded far away. I couldn't stop staring at his left wrist, where an old Seiko watch caught the fluorescent light. Scratched crystal, worn brown leather strap. I knew that watch. Stellan noticed my stare and glanced down. Old watch. My mother gave it to me. Said she found it the day I was born. Never could bring herself to throw it away, so she put it on my wrist when I turned 16. Told me it was a good luck charm. He smiled self-consciously. Sentimental, I know. It's a good watch, I said, and my voice was catching on something in my throat. Seiko. They last forever. That's my watch. I reported it missing 35 years ago. November 14th, 1991. Texas Medical Center. I'd taken it off because the nurse said no jewelry during delivery. Set it on the counter by the sink. When I went back for it 3 hours later, it was gone. Hospital security filed a report. I never saw it again, until now, on my son's wrist. I could not speak. Stellan studied my face, and I saw the wariness creep into his expression, the instinct of someone who'd learned early that sudden interest from strangers often came with complications. Is everything okay, Mr. Caldwell? Would you like to get coffee? The words came out steadier than I felt. There's something I need to discuss with you. He tilted his head, Vera's exact gesture when she was curious. About the programs. About something more personal. The wariness deepened. I'm not sure. Please, I drove a long way to meet you. Just coffee. 30 minutes of your time. He studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him weighing the request against his instincts. Finally, he nodded slowly. Okay, there's a place 2 blocks from here. But I have to be back soon. I have paperwork to finish tonight. Thank you. We walked out of the Sunshine Special Education Center together, into the October evening, and somewhere in the darkness, 200 meters away, Desmond sat in his Escalade, watching his father leave with a stranger, wondering what the hell was happening and why it made his stomach turn with something that felt suspiciously like fear. We sat across from each other at a corner table in a coffee shop that smelled like burnt espresso and second chances, and I tried to find the words to tell a 35-year-old man that everything he'd ever known about his identity was a lie built on my wife's fear. The cafe was nearly empty at 7:15 on a Tuesday evening. A tired barista wiped down the counter. Two college students hunched over laptops in the far corner. And through the front window, if I angled my head just right, I could see the black Escalade parked across the street with a silhouette behind the wheel. Desmond had followed me. He was watching. He had no idea what he was about to lose. Stellan ordered black coffee. So did I. We sat in silence while the barista ground beans and steamed milk for someone else's order. Stellan's wariness was evident in every line of his posture. Shoulders tight, hands folded on the table, prepared for complications he couldn't yet name. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, I said finally, but I need you to hear me out completely. I'm listening. His voice was calm but guarded. I took a breath that felt like it might be my last easy one for a while. November 14th, 1991. Texas Medical Center, Austin. Your mother, Roxanne Whitfield, gave birth to a healthy baby boy in delivery room 3. In delivery room 4, my wife Vera gave birth to a baby with severe bilateral clubfoot. Stellan's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened around the coffee cup. That's Dr. Clifford Holbrook. He was drowning in student loans. His wife had just been diagnosed with MS. Vera offered him $50,000 to switch the babies while both mothers slept. Stellan set his coffee down carefully. You're telling me that my mother isn't really my mother. Roxanne Whitfield raised you, loved you, worked 2 jobs to pay for your surgeries. She is your mother in every way that matters. I leaned forward, but biologically no. You're my son, mine and Vera's. The silence stretched so long I thought he might just stand up and walk away. This sounds like a soap opera plot, he said finally. People don't just switch babies. They did, that night. And I didn't know until 3 days ago when Dr. Holbrook called me. He's dying, pancreatic cancer. He saw a video of I Stopped. Stellan's eyes narrowed. I saw that video. Your son slapping you at your birthday party. It went viral. #birthday slap. My chest tightened. You saw it. Everyone saw it. He leaned back in his chair and something shifted in his expression. This feels like I don't want to be that person. What person? The one who shows up after a rich man's public humiliation claiming to be his real son. The opportunist who crawls out of the woodwork when you're vulnerable. His voice was quiet, but firm. Roxanne Whitfield raised me, worked 2 jobs for my surgeries, loved me despite my disability, or maybe because of it. She is my mother. That doesn't change no matter what you're claiming. How do you convince someone to believe the unbelievable when believing it means their entire life has been built on someone else's desperate lie? I'm not asking you to replace her, I said. I'm just asking you to know the truth. Why now? Why track me down and tell me this wild story? Because Dr. Holbrook told me. Because I found Vera's diary documenting 35 years of guilt. Because I saw your smile through that window and knew. I gestured to his wrist. Because you're wearing my watch. That's a coincidence. Maybe. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the cufflink I'd been carrying since I left the ranch. Sterling silver engraved with 2 letters. But this isn't. Stellan stared at the cufflink in my palm. What is that? Wedding gift from Vera. June 1988. I set it on the table between us. My initials before I legally changed my name to Floyd Caldwell in 1995. I was born Arthur Sterling. Changed it. When the company started expanding, wanted something that sounded more accessible, less old money. Stellan's face had gone very still, as he said quietly. Something in his tone made my pulse jump. What? He reached up slowly and pulled a thin silver chain from beneath his shirt. At the end hung a small bracelet, baby-sized, probably worn around the wrist once, but now hanging on a chain around his neck. He unclasped it and laid it on the table, engraved in the same script as my cufflink AS. My mother gave me this, Stellan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Said she found it when I was born. In my blanket, she thought. Never told me what the letters stood for. I've worn it my whole life. I stared at the matching pieces. The cufflink had fallen off my shirt when I'd leaned over the bassinet to see my newborn son. I remembered it catching on something, remembered Vera saying she'd find it later. But we'd been so overwhelmed with the birth, with Vera's condition, with everything that happened that night, it must have fallen into the baby's diaper, into Stellan's diaper, and Roxanne had found it. The bracelet and the cufflink lay side by side on the coffee-stained table between us. Perfect matches. "This can't be coincidence," Stellan said. "No." He picked up the bracelet with shaking hands, comparing it to the cufflink. Same silver, same engraving style, same initials. "Arthur Sterling," he repeated. "Your old name." "My father's name. His father's before that. Going back 4 generations?" I watched his face. "You were supposed to be the 5th. Stellan stood abruptly, the chair scraping against worn linoleum. He walked to the door without a word, pushed it open, stepped out into the October evening. Through the window, I watched him lean against the brick wall, one hand over his mouth, the other still gripping the silver bracelet. I sat alone at the table with my cufflink and the truth between us, waiting to see if he'd come back inside or walk away from everything I'd just destroyed. Across the street, Desmond leaned forward in the Escalade, watching the stranger his father had met, wondering why the teacher was standing outside in the cold, looking like his world had just shattered. When Stellan came back through that coffee shop door 5 minutes later, bringing October cold that still clung to his jacket, the question he asked wasn't whether my story was true. It was what came next, if it was. "Even if this wild story is real," he said, sitting down slowly across from me, "what do you want from me?" The shift in his question told me everything. Not, is this real? But what then? He'd processed the evidence outside in the cold, the matching bracelet and cufflink. The watch, the specific details only someone who'd lived through it could know. His skepticism hadn't disappeared, but it had cracked. "I want to know the truth," I said. "Scientifically. A DNA test that proves this one way or another. And if it's true, I want the chance to know you. That's all. Just the chance. You understand, I had a mother." His voice was controlled but firm. "Roxanne Whitfield. She was enough. She was everything." "I know. She worked 2 jobs to pay for my surgeries, sat with me through 4 procedures and years of physical therapy. Never once made me feel like I was broken or less than. She was my mother." He leaned forward slightly. "No DNA test changes that. We clear on that. Crystal clear. I'm not trying to replace anyone. She raised you. She loved you. She is your mother." Stellan nodded once sharp, then continued. Second I saw that video. Your son slapping you at your birthday party. I'm not stupid. I know how this looks. Rich man gets publicly humiliated. Suddenly some teacher with a disability shows up claiming biological connection. I won't be seen as the opportunist who approached you for money. That's not... Let me finish." He held up a hand. "Third, I have students who depend on me. A center to run. Real responsibilities to real people who need consistency. I'm not abandoning my life because some rancher shows up with a wild story and matching jewelry." He was giving me conditions. I would have accepted 100 more if it meant he'd stay in that chair and keep talking. "I agree to all of that," I said. "Roxanne Whitfield is your mother. You're not approaching me, I approached you. And I'm not asking you to abandon anything. I'm just asking for truth." Stellan studied my face for a long moment. "DNA test," he said finally. "Wednesday morning, I can take a day off from the center. There's a lab in Austin Medical Laboratory. I looked it up on my phone while I was outside. We go together, get tested together, wait for results together. Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. And if it comes back positive..." He paused, and I saw him struggling with the implications of what he was saying. "If the test shows you're my biological father, you don't get to buy your way into my life. You earn it. Same way I've earned everything else. Through time, through showing up, through proving you're worth knowing." I extended my hand across the table. "I wouldn't want it any other way." He looked at my hand for 3 seconds. That felt like 3 years. Then he reached out and shook it. His grip was firm and steady, and I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt since Vera died, the possibility of hope. "Wednesday morning," he repeated. "Austin Medical Laboratory, 9 a.m. We do this right." "We do this right," I agreed. Stellan stood, pulling his jacket tighter against the cold that would be waiting outside. I need to get back to the center, finish my paperwork. Of course. And I need to think, process. This is a lot. Take all the time you need. He nodded once more, then walked toward the door. I watched him go, that distinctive limp, more pronounced when he was tired, and I thought about 35 years of surgeries and struggle while I'd been building wind farms and raising another woman's son. Through the window, I saw him cross the parking lot, climb into an old Honda Civic that had seen better years, and drive away. 200 meters down the street, Desmond sat in his black Escalade watching the whole thing and understanding none of it. He pulled out his phone and called Saskia. He drove all day to Orlando to shake hands with some disabled teacher. Desmond said, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who thought he'd figured something out. Probably trying to look charitable after the slap went viral. Damage control. A teacher? Saskia's voice came through cold and calculating even over the phone line. What kind of teacher? Special ed. Works with crippled kids at some center called Sunshine. Dad probably thinks if he's seen doing charity work, people will forget about me hitting him. You think that's what this is, PR art? What else would it be? He drives 9 hours to Orlando, meets with this guy for an hour in a coffee shop. They shake hands like they're sealing some kind of deal. It's obviously about optics, rebuilding his reputation with the 50-plus crowd who watch the slap video and feel sorry for him. Desmond had no idea. None. Keep watching, Saskia said, and her voice had that edge it always got when she was 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Men don't drive 9 hours for PR. There's more here. Find out what. I'm heading back to Texas. I've got that meeting with Lamar Farrell tomorrow about the Sterling Energy investment. The meeting I told you not to take, Saskia said sharply. Desmond, that investment is... It's fine. Farrell's putting in $3 million. I just need to match it. With what money? I'll figure it out. Desmond ended the call before she could argue. I sat in the coffee shop and watched the Escalade pull out of the parking lot, heading west back toward Texas. Desmond thought he'd figured something out tonight. He'd watched me shake hands with a special education teacher and decided it was charity PR damage control from a desperate old man trying to rebuild his reputation after viral humiliation. He had absolutely no idea that Handshake had just cost him everything: his inheritance, his name, his claim to 35 years of a life that had never really been his to begin with. In 3 days, a lab technician in Austin would hand me an envelope containing a percentage that would either confirm the impossible or prove I'd lost my mind chasing ghosts and broken watches and matching silver initials. But sitting in that coffee shop at 8:30 on a Tuesday night, watching both my sons drive away in opposite directions, one toward a future we'd build together, one toward a reckoning he couldn't imagine, I already knew what the test would say. I'd seen Vera's smile. That was enough. But knowing and proving are different things. So I waited for Wednesday morning, and I tried not to think about what came next. 20 minutes after Stellan drove away from that coffee shop, Desmond called Saskia from somewhere west of Orlando, his voice carrying the false confidence of someone who thought he'd figured something out. I'm telling you it's damage control, he said. Dad meets with some disabled teacher, probably promises a donation, gets photographed doing charity work. Classic PR move after a scandal. Saskia's voice came through the phone cold and sharp as a scalpel. Describe this teacher. Age, appearance, disability, everything. Why does that... Describe him, Desmond? I don't know. 35, maybe. Walks with a limp. Clubfoot, I think. Teaches special ed kids at some center in Orlando. Silence on the line. Then, same age as you. Born with a disability. Desmond, this isn't charity. Your father found his biological son. I realized too late that while Desmond had seen charity, my wife had seen exactly what it was a threat. That's insane, Desmond said, but his voice had lost its certainty. People don't just find biological sons, unless there was a switch, a mistake, something your mother knew about and never told you. Saskia's strategic mind was already 3 moves ahead. Listen to me very carefully. Hire Marcus Feldman in Austin, best private investigator in Texas. I want everything on this teacher by Friday. Medical records, financial history, anything we can use. Use for what? Legal defense. This isn't about charity, Desmond. This is about disinheritance. Your father is replacing you. The call ended, and 200 miles away in an Orlando hotel room, I sat with Vera's diary open across my knees, reading the entries I'd skipped in my rush to understand the switch itself. June 1998. Stellan Lockwood, age 7. Found him in the county newspaper. Science fair winner. Project on butterfly migration. The photo is small, but I can see his face clearly. He's smiling. The surgery worked. He's walking without the walker now. Roxanne is in the background beaming. She gave him everything I was too afraid to give. Vera had tracked him. For decades. Through newspaper clippings, online searches, whatever fragments of his life she could find from a distance. May 2007. His high school graduation photo appeared on the school website. Cap and gown. That smile, my smile. The leg brace is smaller now, barely visible under his gown. He made it through. Despite me. Despite everything. He made it through. The diary fell open to a page from 2007. Stellan's high school graduation. Vera had printed the photo from the school website, had kept it hidden in this diary for 9 years. I stared at the image of a 17-year-old boy I should have known, should have raised, should have celebrated. Wednesday morning, I met Stellan at Austin Medical Laboratory. We gave our DNA samples simple cheek swabs that took 30 seconds and felt like signing away the past. The technician said results in 3 days. We left separately without many words, both understanding that everything hung on numbers we couldn't control. I spent those 3 days in the Orlando hotel room, unable to go back to Texas, unable to do anything but read and reread Vera's diary. November 2023. I found his school's website. There are videos. He teaches now, special education. I've watched them 50 times. He kneels beside the children the way I used to kneel. In my garden, patient, gentle, never rushing. In one video, he helps a little girl take 3 steps on parallel bars, and his face lights up like she'd just won the Olympics. That's my smile, my compassion, but his strength, his earned grace. She'd found the Sunshine Center website, watched him teach, seen the man he'd become without her, without me, through sheer force of will and Roxanne Whitfield's devotion. The final entry written 3 weeks before the cancer took her. He has my smile. He walks with difficulty, but walks with grace despite everything I did to him. I destroyed his chance at a father who would have loved him, but God gave him a mother worthy of him. Roxanne Whitfield saved my son from me. The money I used to bribe Dr. Holbrook, I learned it paid for Stellan's surgeries. Some terrible circle of justice I don't understand. I considered telling Floyd, confessing before I die. But what good would it do now Stellan has built a life? Floyd has built an empire, and I have built only guilt. Some things you carry to the grave. This is mine. I closed the diary and sat in the silence of a hotel room, 3 states away from home, and I understood Vera better than I ever had when she was alive. She'd been terrified I couldn't love imperfection, and in trying to protect me from disappointment, she'd destroyed both her sons' chances at the lives they should have had. Saturday morning came too fast and too slow. Stellan arrived at Austin Medical Laboratory at 8:55. I'd been there since 8:30, sitting in the waiting room with its hard plastic chairs and fluorescent lights that made everything look slightly unreal. "You look like you haven't slept in 3 days," he said, sitting down in the chair beside me. "Have you?" "No." We sat in silence. Neither of us picked up the magazines scattered on the table. Neither of us looked at our phones. We just waited, and the waiting felt like the longest 3 minutes of my life. The envelope was thin, just a few pages, a whole life reduced to numbers and percentages. At 9 o'clock, exactly, the lab technician emerged from the back office. A woman in pale blue scrubs, with kind eyes that had probably delivered 1,000 results to 1,000 nervous people. She held a manila envelope that contained 3 pages and the power to redefine 2 men's entire understanding of family. "Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Lockwood, your results are ready." The technician walked toward us, and I felt Stellan go absolutely still beside me. 72 hours of waiting, 35 years of not knowing, and now a woman in scrubs crossing a waiting room floor held the answer to every question I'd been asking since Dr. Holbrook's call 7 days ago. My hands were shaking again, so were Stellan's. The technician handed me the envelope. I tore it open and pulled out 3 pages of genetic analysis. The number was highlighted in yellow on page 299.7%, probability of paternity, as close to certainty as science could measure. Yet somehow that missing 0.3% felt like the space where 35 years of doubt and longing still lived. I handed the pages to Stellan. He read slowly, eyes stopping on the highlighted number. He stared at that percentage for a full minute without moving. "It's real," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "All of it. Dr. Holbrook, Vera, the switch. Everything you said was real." "I didn't want to be right," I said. I wanted Vera to have been wrong, but she wasn't. 99.7%. 35 years of not knowing reduced to a decimal and a percentage. Stellan stood and walked to the window, staring out at Austin morning traffic. He stood there for 3 minutes. When he turned back, his voice was controlled. "Roxanne Whitfield is still my mother. Forever. This paper doesn't change that. Nothing changes that." "I wouldn't want it to," I said. "She raised you. She made you who you are. I'm grateful to her. She worked 2 jobs, sat through 4 surgeries, never once made me feel broken. She was your mother. She is your mother. And I'm just grateful to know the truth, to have the chance to know you." Stellan closed the distance between us and wrapped his arms around me in an embrace that felt like it carried 3.5 decades. We stood in that clinical waiting room, 2 men and a truth finally finding its place. The lab technician quietly slipped out. "What do we do now?" Stellan asked when we stepped back. "We figure it out together, one day at a time. No pressure, just truth." We left Austin at noon and drove west toward Fredericksburg, the DNA results sitting on the dashboard between us. Our first real conversation as confirmed father and son felt both monumental and strangely natural. "Tell me about Vera," Stellan said as Hill Country rolled past. I told him about her watercolors, her quiet strength, how she'd organized everything in our lives but couldn't organize her own guilt, how she'd loved him enough to give him away and spent 35 years watching from the shadows. "The surgeries," I said. "Roxanne must have been incredible. 4 surgeries between ages 2 and 16. She never missed one. Worked night shift at the hospital so she could be there mornings. 2 jobs. CNA by night, daycare assistant by day. Slept about 4 hours between shifts. The money that paid for those surgeries, it was Vera's payment to Dr. Holbrook. He put it in an anonymous orthopedic fund." Stellan was quiet. "So your wife's guilt money saved my ability to walk. I don't know what that is. Karma, justice, grace, maybe all 3. I wrapped both hands around the steering wheel and thought, this is what 35 years of misdirected love finally finding its way home feels like. We talked for 3 hours about his choice to become a special education teacher, wanting to help kids understand disability doesn't mean less than, about my wind farms and sustainable energy, about Roxanne's final years and how the cancer came too fast. And we discovered things no DNA test could measure, but genes had written anyway. We both woke at 5 a.m., no alarm. Both drank coffee, black, no sugar. Both terrible at apologies, preferring action over words. The same head tilt when concentrating. The same quiet laugh that built slowly. Small genetic proofs scattered across conversation, confirming what science already told us. We arrived at Caldwell Ranch as dusk settled over Hill Country, that purple hour when Texas light turns everything soft. But the lights were on in my mansion, bright and celebratory. Through the large front windows I could see Desmond and Saskia in the living room, opening champagne, laughing, celebrating something. Through the window, Desmond raised his champagne glass in a toast. "That's Desmond and his wife Saskia," I said, up putting the truck in park. "They're celebrating something." "They don't know," Stellan said. "They have absolutely no idea what's coming." We sat watching them through the lit windows. Desmond in his expensive suit, Saskia in designer black, both toasting to something they thought they'd secured. Maybe they thought my Orlando trip had been harmless. Maybe they believed they'd weathered the storm. Stellan looked at the DNA results on the dashboard, then at the celebration inside, then at me. "You want to tell them now?" he asked quietly. I opened the truck door. They've been celebrating long enough. We walked toward the mansion together, father and son, carrying scientific proof that would end one inheritance and begin another. Inside, Desmond saw movement through the window and turned toward the door, champagne still in hand, smile still on his face. Then he saw Stellan walking beside me, the limping stranger from Orlando, the disabled teacher he'd dismissed as charity, PR, and the smile began to fade. Saskia's eyes found us through the glass, and even from 30 feet away, I could see her strategic mind already calculating, already understanding exactly what this was. I didn't knock. I walked into my own mansion like I still owned it because I did, and the shift in power was immediate. Desmond and Saskia froze mid-celebration champagne glasses halfway to their lips. laughter dying in their throats as they saw Stellan walking beside me through the front door. "What?" Desmond started, setting his glass down on the side table with too much force. "What is this? Who is that?" "Good evening, Desmond. Saskia." I closed the door behind us. "We need to talk." "Who is this person?" Desmond's voice climbed higher. "Why did you bring some stranger into our home? Our home." The possessive pronoun hung in the air like smoke. "That's not a stranger, Desmond," I said calmly. "That is the truth." Saskia's eyes narrowed, moving from me to Stellan and back again. Her strategic mind was already working, connecting dots Desmond couldn't see yet. Her hand gripped the champagne flute so tightly I could see her knuckles going white. "Wait," she said slowly. "Is this the teacher from Orlando? The one from Greenfield?" So her private investigator had been busy. "Yes," I said. "This is Stellan Lockwood. He's a special education teacher at the Sunshine Center in Orlando. And 35 years ago, he was switched at birth with Desmond at Texas Medical Center." The words landed like stones in still water ripples spreading outward. "That's insane," Desmond said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "People don't just... That's not possible." "It happened," Stellan said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken since we entered. November 14th, 1991. Texas Medical Center, Austin. Dr. Clifford Holbrook was the attending physician. He switched 2 newborns while both mothers slept. Desmond stared at Stellan like he was looking at a ghost. Saskia's champagne flute trembled in her hand. I could hear the tiny sound of bubbles fizzing in the silence, each pop a small detonation in the tension filling the room. "This is ridiculous," Desmond said, but he was looking at me now, not at Stellan. "Dad, what is this? Some kind of scheme? Did he approach you for money after the slap video?" "No," I said. "I approached him after Dr. Holbrook called me with the truth. Before I show you what was inside that envelope, are you still with me?" Comment A if you think Desmond already knew the truth, or B if this is hitting him for the first time. Add one reason why. Please note what follows contains some fictionalized details added to deepen the emotional impact. The core message is what matters. I pulled the manila envelope from my jacket pocket and placed it on the coffee table between us. The DNI results. 3 pages that would end one life and begin another. "That's the proof," I said. "DNA analysis from Austin Medical Laboratory, taken 3 days ago. Results confirmed this morning." Desmond stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "I'm not looking at that. This is insane. You can't just..." "I've seen the hospital records," Stellan said, his voice still quiet but firm. "I know what happened. Your mother, Vera, saw her baby's clubfoot and panicked. She was convinced your father couldn't love an imperfect child. So she bribed Dr. Holbrook $50,000 to switch us. My mother wouldn't..." Desmond stopped. His face had gone pale. "She did," I said. "I found her diary. 35 years of entries documenting her guilt. She watched Stellan from a distance his entire life. She knew." Saskia had gone very still, her champagne forgotten. She was staring at Stellan with the cold calculation of someone doing math in her head. Inheritance math, legal math, the kind of equations that measured wealth in decades and millions. "You don't have to believe my word," I said, picking up the envelope. "You can believe science." I tore it open and pulled out the results. Found the highlighted line on page 2. DNA analysis of samples, collected November 6, 2025. I read aloud. Subject A, Floyd Caldwell. Subject B, Stellan Lockwood. Probability of paternity, 99.7%. The champagne glass slipped from Desmond's hand. It fell in slow motion, or maybe that's just how I remember it. The crystal catching the light as it tumbled, the champagne arcing out in a golden spray, the sharp crack as it hit the marble floor and shattered into a dozen pieces. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We all just stood there in absolute silence, listening to champagne spread across the marble like an accusation, the only sound in a room where everything had just changed forever. Desmond stared at the DNA results on the coffee table. Then he looked up at Stellan, really looked at him for the first time. His eyes moved across Stellan's face like he was searching for something. And then I saw it, the expression I'd never seen on Desmond's face before. Not shock, not denial, not even anger. Recognition. Cold certain recognition. He'd known. Somehow, somewhere, Desmond had known the truth. And in that moment, watching him stare at my biological son, With that look of terrible understanding, I realized the question wasn't whether he'd known. The question was for how long. How long have you known? I asked. Desmond didn't answer. He just stood there among the shattered champagne glass, staring at Stellan like he was seeing a ghost he'd been trying to forget. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the first piece of evidence, Dr. Holbrook's handwritten note. I placed it on the coffee table carefully, like a prosecutor building an airtight case. This is Dr. Clifford Holbrook's notation, I said. He called me in October to confess what happened the night you were born. The night he switched 2 newborns for $50,000. Desmond's eyes flicked to the paper, then away. That doesn't prove anything, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. Old paperwork gets mixed up all the time. I pulled out Vera's diary next, placed it beside the note. Your mother's diary. 35 years of entries. She documented everything. The panic when she saw the clubfoot. The bribe. The guilt that eventually turned to cancer. I opened to a page I'd marked. November 15th, 1991. God forgive me for what I've done to both my babies, the one I kept and the one I gave away. Saskia's breathing had changed, faster, shallower. Then explain this, I said, pulling the old Seiko watch from my pocket. I lost this watch the night you were born. 35 years later, I found it on Stellan's wrist. Roxanne Whitfield found it in his blanket at the hospital. I set it on the table. And this. I pulled out my cufflink, the silver one engraved with A.S. Arthur Sterling, my initials before I changed my name in 1995. Wedding gift from Vera. It fell into a newborn's diaper the night of the switch. I looked at Stellan. Show them. Stellan slowly pulled the matching silver bracelet from beneath his shirt, the one engraved with the same initials. He laid it beside my cufflink. Perfect matches. Each piece of evidence was a nail in a coffin I'd been building for 35 years, and now I was finally hammering the lid shut. None of that proves, Desmond started. And finally, I said, placing the DNA results on top of everything else. Scientific proof, Austin Medical Laboratory. Sample collected November 6th. Results confirmed November 9th. Desmond stared at the paper for 3 seconds. Then his hand shot out and snatched it up. He tore the results in half, then half again, and again, shredding the pages into confetti that scattered across the evidence on the coffee table and onto the floor. This is insane, his voice cracked. You can't just undo 35 years with some lab report. I'm your son. I've been your son my entire life. Saskia gasped. Desmond, what are you doing? Making it clear that I don't accept this, Desmond said, still holding torn paper. You can't just 99.7% probability of paternity, I said calmly. Those are your words now scattered on my floor. Destroying the paper doesn't destroy the truth. Desmond's face had gone red. You think you can replace me? Just bring in some crippled teacher and pretend he's your son. Stellan flinched at the word but didn't speak. I'm not pretending anything, I said. He is my son. Biologically. Legally. In every way that matters. Legally? Desmond's voice climbed higher. What are you talking about? Brent Thornton received the full electronic report on Monday. I said, You're 3 days too late to destroy anything that matters. Desmond froze, mid-motion, torn paper still in his hands. Brent Thornton, by your attorney. My attorney, I corrected. Not yours. Not anymore. He's already filed the DNA results with both Texas and Florida state courts. Certified copies. Electronic backups. Everything properly documented. You can't. I can, and I have. I kept my voice level controlled. Formal disinheritance proceedings began this morning, under Texas probate code and Florida estate law. Stellan Lockwood will be recognized as my biological son and rightful heir. Desmond sank onto the couch like his legs had given out. He still held the shredded paper, staring at it like he couldn't understand how it had gotten there. I built half that company with you, he said, and for the first time his voice sounded small. I worked beside you for 15 years. I helped build Caldwell Energy Solutions. You built it with my name, I said. Stellan earned it with my blood. This is insane, Desmond repeated, but the fight had gone out of his voice. You're punishing me for something I didn't even do. I didn't switch us. Vera did. Dr. Holbrook did. Not me. No, I said. I'm correcting a mistake that should never have happened, and giving my biological son what should have been his from the beginning. Saskia had gone very still. I watched her face as the implications settled in the calculations happening behind her eyes. Wait, she said suddenly. If he's not your son, then what happens to the estate? Everything transfers to my biological child, I said. Stellan. Her expression shifted through 3 stages in 5 seconds. Confusion, calculation, and finally, cold fury. She turned to look at Desmond on the couch holding torn paper like it might somehow matter, and I saw something die in her eyes. The company, she said slowly. The ranch, the properties in Florida and Austin, the wind farm contracts, all of it. All of it, I confirmed. Saskia stepped away from Desmond. That's when I knew he'd lost everything, including her. Does the disinheritance affect our community property? She asked, her voice pure ice. Of her. For the first time since I'd walked into that room, Desmond looked genuinely afraid. Not of me, of her. Saskia's eyes swept the room, calculating her exit strategy before she even speaks. She moved with the precision of a woman who'd already made her decision hours ago, maybe days ago. Her hand slipped from Desmond's arm like she was shedding dead skin. I need to make a call, she said, her voice flat and businesslike. She didn't look at him when she said it. Saskia, wait. Desmond reached for her, but she stepped back just out of range. Don't. The word came out sharp, final. She turned to face him fully then, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before. Contempt so pure it was almost elegant. I can't believe I wasted 5 years on a nobody with poor blood. The room went still. Even the air seemed to freeze mid-breath. Saskia's eyes swept the room, calculating her exit strategy before she even spoke. She moved with the precision of a woman who'd already made her decision hours ago, maybe days ago. Her hand slipped from Desmond's arm like she was shedding dead skin. I need to make a call, she said, her voice flat and businesslike. She didn't look at him when she said it. Saskia, wait. Desmond reached for her, but she stepped back just out of range. Don't. The word came out sharp, final. She turned to face him fully then, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before. Contempt so pure it was almost elegant. I can't believe I wasted 5 years on a nobody with poor blood. The room went dead silent. Desmond's face went white, then red. What did you just... You heard me. Saskia's smile was thin, surgical. Did you really think I'd stay for what? A man whose entire identity just got shredded in front of a room full of witnesses. She glanced at Stellan, then back at Desmond. I have standards, darling. You just failed to meet them. She walked out. No hesitation, no backward glance. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam. Desmond stood there, staring at the door, his chest heaving. For a moment, I thought he might cry. Then his face twisted into something uglier, and he spun on Stellan. This is your fault, he spat. You and your goddamn, what are you anyway? A glorified teacher with a limp? Stellan didn't flinch. He stood ground, looking at Desmond with something that might have been pity. I'm Floyd's son, he said quietly. I never wanted your money. I just wanted to know the truth. That broke something in Desmond. His shoulders sagged, and for just a second I saw the boy I'd raised, the one who used to climb into my lap after nightmares, who'd held my hand at Vera's funeral. Then the moment passed, and he was a stranger again. I hope you're happy, he said to me, his voice hollow. I hope this was worth it. He walked out, not with Saskia's cold efficiency, but with the slow, defeated steps of a man who had nowhere left to go. The house fell into a heavy quiet after they both left. Stellan was the only one remaining. He stood at the door, hesitant. Mr. Caldwell. Floyd, I said. Call me Floyd. He nodded. Floyd, thank you. For being honest. I know it cost you. It did, I admitted, but some costs are worth paying. He smiled a real smile this time and left for his hotel. Stellan was the last to leave. He stood at the door, hesitant. Mr. Caldwell. Floyd, I said. Call me Floyd. He nodded. Floyd, thank you. For being honest. I know it cost you. It did, I admitted, but some costs are worth paying. He smiled a real smile this time and left. The house felt emptier than it had in years. Not because Desmond left, but because I'd finally let him go. I sat in my study past midnight, staring at the mahogany desk where I'd signed so many contracts, so many deals. The checkbook sat in front of me, open to a blank page. $3 million. That's what I'd decided on. Not the $47 million Desmond had expected. Not the nothing he probably deserved. Something in between, enough to give him a chance to rebuild, to find out who he was when he wasn't trying to be a Caldwell. Mercy, not reward. Closure, not reconciliation. I picked up the pen and wrote the amount in careful measured strokes. 3,000,000. In the memo line, I wrote nothing. What could I possibly say? I signed my name Floyd Caldwell, the name I'd chosen for myself 31 years ago when I'd decided Arthur Sterling wasn't enough anymore. My hand hovered over the check. This was the last thing I'd give the man who'd called me Dad for 35 years. The last connection between us rendered in ink and paper and numbers. I set down the pen and stared at what I'd written, wondering if compassion was something you could learn, or if Desmond would spend the rest of his life angry at a truth he'd never wanted to hear. I sealed the envelope at 1 in the morning and left it on the desk. By 7:30, I was sitting in the living room, with it resting on the coffee table, watching morning sunlight cut across the hardwood floors. Desmond arrived at 7:45, 15 minutes early, the first time in 5 years he'd shown punctuality for anything involving me. I heard the Porsche pull up the engine, cut the door close. His footsteps on the porch were slower than usual, deliberate. When I opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept. His shirt was wrinkled at the collar, his eyes red-rimmed. "Thank you for coming," I said. "You said it was important." His voice was flat empty of the venom that had been there 2 days ago. "It is. I wanted to do this in person." I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat without argument, without the usual hesitation to see who else might be in the room. Stellan stood near the window, giving us space, but present a quiet witness to the end of something that had lasted most of my adult life. The envelope sat between us on the coffee table. Desmond's eyes flicked to it, then away. "I made a decision," I said, "about your future." He didn't respond, just waited. I opened the envelope and placed the check on the table face up. The numbers looked larger written out than they had in my head, $3 million. Desmond stared at it, his jaw tightened then released. $3 million from my personal savings. Not company assets, I said. Not a reward, not a bribe. This is a farewell. His eyes stayed on the check. "You don't owe me anything." "I know." "Then why?" "Because I raised you," I said simply. "For 35 years I fed you, clothed. You paid for your education, gave you my name. That meant something even if the biology didn't. This is settlement of my foster fatherly obligations. It's also closure." The silence stretched. Outside I heard a mourning dove call from somewhere near the stable. Desmond leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He looked older than 35, older than me in some ways. "I don't deserve this," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "You don't, but I'm giving it to you anyway. $3 million, roughly $85,000 per year." For every year I'd raised him the price of closure, measured in currency I'd never wanted to count. He reached forward and picked up the check, folding it once carefully like it might disintegrate in his hands. He slipped it into his jacket pocket and sat back. "I should have been better to you," he said. The truth of it sat between us, undeniable and too late. "Yes," I said, "you should have." He nodded, accepting the verdict without defense. "I'm sorry it ended this way." "So am I." Another silence, this one heavier. I realized this was the first honest conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. All the layers stripped away, all the pretense gone. Just two men who'd lived under the same roof and called each other family, now acknowledging that the bond had always been thinner than either of us wanted to admit. Desmond stood. I followed his lead. We walked to the front entrance together, not side by side, but single file, him leading me a few steps behind. The hallway felt longer than it ever had, 35 years compressed into 30 feet of polished hardwood. Every step echoed. I thought about the first time he'd walked this hallway, 6 months old, cradled in Vera's arms. I thought about the last Christmas before she died, when he'd run down this same path in Superman pajamas, desperate to see what Santa had brought. I thought about the day he'd graduated summa cum laude from Rice, how he'd stood right here in his cap and gown, and I'd told him I was proud of him. I had been proud. That was the worst part. It hadn't all been a lie. Desmond reached the door and stopped his hand on the handle. He turned and looked past me to where Stellan still stood in the living room doorway, respectful and silent. Something crossed Desmond's face. Not anger, not resentment. Envy, pure, aching envy. Not for the inheritance or the name or the estate. For the relationship he'd destroyed through his own arrogance and cruelty. "He would have been enough for you," Desmond said quietly, almost to himself. I didn't deny it. He looked back at me, and for just a second I saw the boy again. The one who'd needed me, who'd loved me in the uncomplicated way children love their fathers before the world teaches them to want more. Then the moment passed. Goodbye, Desmond. Goodbye. He opened the door and stepped through. I didn't follow him onto the porch. I stayed in the doorway watching as he walked to his car, climbed in, started the engine. 35 years ended not with a slam, but with a whisper, the sound of a door closing on a life that should have been mine. The silver Porsche rolled down the driveway slow and deliberate, then turned onto the county road and disappeared behind the oak trees. I watched until there was nothing left to see. When I turned back toward the house, I saw Stellan in the kitchen, naturally making coffee as if he'd lived there for years. He moved around the counter with easy familiarity, opening cabinets, finding mugs, pouring water into the reservoir. I made coffee, he said when he noticed me watching. I hope that's all right. That's perfect. He smiled a small, genuine smile and pulled down a second mug. How do you take it? Black, 1 sugar. He nodded and reached for the sugar bowl, the same one Vera and I had bought at an estate sale in 1989. His movements were careful, measured, unhurried. Stellan stood at the kitchen counter pouring coffee into 2 mugs, with the same careful precision I'd watched Roxanne Whitfield use in the old photographs months ago. Same angle of the wrist, same slight tilt of the head. He was hers and mine. For the first time in 61 years, I understood what it meant to see yourself in someone else. We sat at the kitchen table for an hour, drinking coffee and not saying much. The silence felt comfortable, necessary, like the pause between movements in a symphony. When Stellan asked if I had business to handle today, I told him yes. Legal matters. He asked if he could come with me. 3 hours after Desmond's departure, we arrived at Brent Thornton's office in downtown Austin. Brent stood when we entered his office, hand extended toward Stellan, with the kind of curiosity reserved for legends made flesh. Mr. Lockwood, Stellan. I've represented Floyd for 12 years, but this is the most extraordinary case I've ever handled. Stellan shook his hand and smiled. I imagine it's not every day someone discovers they have the wrong son. Or the right one, Brent said, depending on perspective. He gestured us to the chairs across from his desk. The office overlooked the Austin skyline floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Capitol dome in the distance. Brent had moved to this building 2 years ago after Caldwell Energy Solutions had become his largest client. I have documents for both of you, Brent said, pulling 2 folders from a drawer. He opened the first one and laid it flat on the desk. Disinheritance paperwork. Desmond Caldwell has been removed from all wills trusts and corporate succession plans under Texas and Florida law. I stared at the pages. My signature line appeared on 7 different documents. Legally, Desmond Caldwell has no claim to Caldwell Energy Solutions or your personal estate. Brent continued. The basis is DNA evidence combined with discovery of hospital error. It's ironclad. How long before this is final? I asked. It became final the moment you signed. DNA evidence makes it uncontestable. I picked up the pen and began signing. Each stroke of ink felt heavier than the last. Desmond's name appeared in paragraph after paragraph, always followed by the word removed, or excluded, or disinherited. Legal language for severing what had taken 35 years to build. Stellan watched quietly, his expression unreadable. When I finished the last signature, Brent collected the pages and placed them back in the folder. There's more, he said. Good news, actually. The Corpus Christi contract cleared this morning, $85 million over 5 years. I looked up. It cleared. Desmond was blocking it. Brent nodded. He claimed environmental concerns. The board called his bluff once he lost standing. The realization hit me slowly, then all at once. Desmond hadn't been protecting the company. He'd been sabotaging it, using minority shareholder provisions to delay contracts, stall projects, undermine decisions, all while pretending to care about Caldwell Energy Solutions' future. 35 years of inheritance planning dissolved with 5 signatures, proof that biology and law sometimes arrive at the same conclusion through different paths. That contract represents 15% revenue growth, Brent said. The board's already scheduled groundbreaking for January. I nodded, absorbing the information. Desmond's departure had freed the company as much as it had freed me. Brent opened the second folder and slid it across the desk toward Stellan. These documents establish you as Floyd's legal heir and successor. Caldwell Energy Solutions and its personal estate estimated at $340 million. Stellan looked at the papers for a long moment without touching them. His face remained calm, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. $340 million, he said quietly. Approximately, Brent confirmed. The company's value fluctuates with energy markets. Stellan reached forward and picked up the pen. He held it over the signature line, studying the words. Then he set the pen down and gently pushed the documents back toward Brent. I don't need an inheritance, he said. I have my center, I have my students. Brent glanced at me uncertain. Stellan, you're entitled to this, I said. It's yours by blood. I didn't earn it. His voice was firm but not harsh. I spent 35 years teaching special education because that's what mattered to me. I built something meaningful with my life. I don't need to inherit someone else's meaning. He looked at me directly. Give it to the children kids like Clover who need scholarship support equipment. Build programs for students with disabilities. Fund research. Make it matter beyond balance sheets. The office went quiet. Outside, I heard the muffled sound of traffic 17 floors below. This was the moment I truly understood my son. Not the DNA results. Not the hospital records. Not the matching gestures over a coffee pot. This. A man who'd spent 35 years measuring success by service, rendered not assets accumulated. Desmond would have signed those papers before Brent finished speaking. Would have calculated the asset allocation, planned the investment strategy, considered the tax implications. Stellan had pushed them away. There's a compromise, Brent offered. You inherit legally, you are Floyd's son after all. But you establish a foundation. Direct the funds toward education accessibility, scholarship programs. Stellan considered this, then looked at me. Would that work? I'd spent 3 decades building an empire for the wrong son, and 30 seconds realizing the right one didn't want it. You'll inherit it legally, I said. You're my son, but we'll build something together. A foundation. Programs that matter. And I'm selling the ranch. Both Brent and Stellan looked at me in surprise. The mansion, I clarified. Too many ghosts. 35 years of memories that aren't real anymore. We'll consolidate operations between the Texas wind farms and Orlando headquarters. Use the proceeds for the foundation. You'd do that, Stellan asked. I would. The decision felt right the moment I spoke it aloud. That house was supposed to be filled with family. It never was. Maybe the money from selling it can help actual families instead. Brent made notes on a legal pad. I'll draft foundation documents and contact a real estate broker for the property assessment. We spent another 30 minutes discussing logistics board structures, tax designations, timeline for the ranch sale. Brent would handle everything with his usual precision. As we left his office, Stellan stopped in the hallway. Before you sell it, he said, could I visit the ranch one more time? I'd like to see the place where my father lived, even if it was never meant to be my home. I realized then that Stellan didn't want my fortune. He wanted my stories, and I had 35 years of them to tell. We drove back to the ranch the following afternoon. Stellan had asked if he could help pack, and I'd said yes. Before realizing how much the gesture meant, not just the offer to help, but the desire to be part of dismantling what had never been his to begin with. Cardboard boxes lined the living room walls when we arrived. I'd ordered 50 of them, though I suspected we'd need twice that many. We started in Desmond's old bedroom, which felt like the right place to begin erasing the past. The room hadn't changed much since he'd left for college. Sports trophies lined the shelves, soccer, tennis, debate championships. Academic awards hung in frames on the walls, summa cum laude, Dean's List National Merit Scholar. Photographs showed a boy growing into a man, always with the same confident smile I'd mistaken for genuine happiness. I picked up the first Trophy State Championship Soccer 2008. I drove 6 hours to watch him score the winning goal, I said, wrapping it in newspaper. Overtime. Penalty kick. He looked at me in the stands right before he took the shot. Stellan took the trophy from me and placed it carefully in a box. He was your son for 35 years, he said quietly. Those memories are still real. They should have been yours. Maybe? He picked up another frame, Desmond's Rice University diploma. But they weren't. And that's not your fault or mine. It just is. We worked in silence for a while, filling boxes with the artifacts of a childhood I'd believed was mine to give. Every object told a story. Every story ended with the same truth: I'd been raising someone else's son, while mine grew up 300 miles away teaching children to read. We moved through the house methodically. Master bedroom, guest rooms. The kitchen where Vera had made pancakes every Sunday morning. The den where I'd taught Desmond to play chess. Where we'd watched football games and argued about politics and pretended we understood each other. "When did you know wind energy would work in Texas?" Stellan asked as we packed books from the study. "The first time I saw a turbine in California, 1989, year before you were born." I paused, holding an old engineering manual. "I was visiting a facility outside San Francisco, watched those blades turn for 2 hours straight, came home, and told Vera I was going to build one." "Tell me about building the first one." So I did. I told him about buying the land, securing permits, fighting regulatory battles. I told him about the first turbine going live in 1994, how I'd stood there with Vera and watched it spin, knowing we'd built something that would outlast us both. I told him about the first major contract, the first expansion, the slow transformation from dream to empire. Stellan listened like he was storing every word, cataloging details he'd need later. Not claiming the history, just understanding it. Learning where he came from so he'd know where he was going. In my study behind a cabinet of old tax files I'd been meaning to digitize for years, I found a manila envelope I didn't recognize. It was marked in handwriting I knew instantly from Vera Lockwood Personal. My hands went cold. Inside were 7 letters handwritten on cream-colored stationery, sealed in individual envelopes, each one addressed to Stellan Lockwood in careful script, none of them mailed. I opened the first one just far enough to read the opening line, "Dear Stellan, there's something I should have told you years ago." I closed it immediately. "Stellan," I called. "I found something that belongs to you." He appeared in the doorway. "What is it?" "Letters. From your mother. She never sent them." I held out the envelope. He took it slowly, carefully, like it might dissolve if he gripped too hard. 7 letters. 7 years of words she'd written but never sent. 7 chances at truth she'd let slip away. "I'll be outside," I said. "Take your time." I stepped onto the back porch and watched the wind turbines turn in the distance. The ones I'd built before Stellan was born. The ones that had funded a life meant for someone else. Through the study window I could see him reading. He sat in my leather chair, each letter unfolded in his lap, reading slowly. His face showed emotions I couldn't name from this distance. Grief, maybe. Relief, anger, love, all of it at once. He read all 7 letters. It took 40 minutes. When he finally emerged, his eyes were red, but dry. He'd folded all 7 letters carefully and placed them in his breast pocket, directly over his heart. His hand pressed there briefly, holding them in place. We stood on the porch together, not speaking. "She loved me," he said finally. "Despite everything, she loved me." "Of course she did. You're easy to love." He smiled, small and fragile. "Thank you for giving these to me." Watching him place those letters over his heart, I understood. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about carrying the pain somewhere safe until it transforms into something else. We sat on the porch steps with coffee, the kind of comfortable silence you only get after saying everything that matters. Eventually, Stellan spoke. "What if we established the foundation in both places, Greenfield and Orlando?" I looked at him. "You'd move to Orlando. Part-time. Keep my center in Greenfield, build a new one there. 2 homes, 2 families." He gestured at the ranch spread out before us. "You built something that bridges distances. Wind farms here, headquarters in Florida. I could do the same educational centers in both places. The Vera Lockwood Memorial Center in Greenfield and something new in Orlando. You've been thinking about this." "I have." He turned to face me. "I'm not trying to replace what you lost. I'm trying to build something new that honors both our lives. Hers and yours. Mine and Desmond's. All of it." I realized then that my son wasn't just accepting this new reality. He was actively constructing a future that made room for everyone, even the people who'd hurt him, even the circumstances that had stolen his childhood. He was already thinking like family. As the sun set over the ranch, Stellan asked if he could keep one room in the mansion before I sold it, just for one night. He wanted to sleep in the house that should have been his childhood home to dream one time, in the place where his father lived. I realized he wasn't trying to claim the past. He was trying to understand where he came from so he could know where to go next. Stellan spent one night in the guest room that should have been his childhood bedroom. In the morning I found him on the back porch, watching the wind turbines, turn coffee in hand, looking peaceful. He didn't say much about the experience, and I didn't ask. Some understanding happens in silence. 2 weeks later, I drove us both to Hill Country Club in Fredericksburg for a private dinner I'd arranged with my closest Texas friends. Lyle Bentley stood when we entered the private dining room, his hand extended not to me, but to Stellan. "Mr. Lockwood, I presume." Stellan shook it, smiling. "Just Stellan. Lyle Bentley, friend of your father's for 15 years. The room was intimate oak paneling, leathered chairs, a table set for 6. 3 other men stood as we entered: Marcus Weatherford, who'd financed my first wind expansion, Donald Krieger, who sat on my corporate board, and James Ashford, my accountant since 1998. I'd told them only that I was bringing someone important to meet them. "Gentlemen," I said, "I'd like you to meet Stellan Lockwood." Lyle frowned slightly. "Lockwood, not Caldwell." "Not yet," I said, "but he's my son, my biological son." The room went quiet. 4 men stared at me, then at Stellan, then back at me. "I think you'd better explain," Marcus said carefully. So I did. I told them about the hospital switch at birth, about Dr. Holbrook's discovery, about the DNA evidence that proved Stellan was mine and Desmond wasn't. I spoke plainly without drama or embellishment. The facts were extraordinary enough on their own. "Desmond and Stellan were switched at birth," I said. "Hospital error, no malice, just tragedy." Lyle set down his water glass slowly. "Good God, Floyd. 35 years? 35 years raising the wrong son while the right one taught special education in Greenfield." Donald looked at Stellan. "And you had no idea?" "None," Stellan said quietly. "I thought my parents were David and Roxanne Lockwood. They did their best with the hand they were dealt." "How did you discover this?" James asked. I explained the research, the investigation, the moment in Vera Lockwood's apartment, when the truth became undeniable. Stellan sat quietly through it all, letting me tell the story. He'd become comfortable with his role in this narrative, not the protagonist, not the villain, just a man caught in circumstances beyond his control. "What about Desmond?" Marcus asked carefully. I took a breath. "Disinherited. He's no longer part of Caldwell Energy Solutions or my estate." Lyle leaned back in his chair, studying Stellan's face. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "I saw Desmond slap you at the Austin Energy Gala, right in front of 200 people. The table went silent. 2 years ago," Lyle continued, "you'd just announced the Corpus Christi expansion, and Desmond walked up and struck you across the face. Called you..." He stopped, glancing at Stellan. "Well, he said things no son should ever say to his father. How many times had my friends watched Desmond's cruelty and wondered what went wrong with my son?" "Now that makes sense," Lyle said quietly. "A man who'd do that wasn't raised by you. He couldn't have been." "He wasn't," I said. "Stellan was." Lyle nodded slowly, as if pieces of a decades-long puzzle were finally clicking into place. The other men exchanged glances, understanding, sympathy, relief, that the mystery of Desmond's character finally had an explanation. Lyle stood and raised his glass. "Gentlemen, I propose a toast to the real Caldwell's Floyd and Stellan. May the next 35 years heal the last." The men stood, glasses raised. Stellan looked uncomfortable with the attention, but stood and lifted his glass. "I'm honored," he said. "Thank you for accepting me. Any son of Floyd's is family to us," Lyle said, "especially the real one." We drank, and the tension in the room broke like a storm passing. The rest of the dinner was easier questions about Stellan's work stories, about the wind business plans for the future. My friends treated him with the same respect they'd always shown me, and I realized this was the first time introducing my son to my world felt natural. Late that evening, back at the ranch, my phone rang. "Brent, I have updates," he said. "Some good, some complicated." "Tell me." "Lamar Farrell has filed suit against Desmond and Saskia over the Sterling Energy scheme. Fraud, misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty. Saskia's also under investigation for distributing that slap video, possible extortion." I absorbed this without emotion. Legal consequences for illegal actions. The system working as designed. "And Desmond," I asked, "checked himself into rehab in Malibu, voluntarily for the first time." I paused. "Rehab for what?" "Doesn't say, but it's 90 days residential. He's actually trying." I looked across the study to where Stellan sat reading one of Vera's letters again. He'd kept all 7 reading them when he thought I wasn't watching. "Send 50,000 to that rehab center," I said. "Anonymous, for his treatment." Brent was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Floyd, after everything..." "Not for him," I interrupted. "For any man trying to become better than he was. $50,000 to a rehab center, the price of believing that even the worst mistakes deserve a chance at redemption. When I hung up, Stellan looked at me. After everything he did to you, some things aren't about revenge, I said. They're about principle. He nodded slowly, understanding, without needing explanation. We moved to the kitchen table with calendars and notebooks. The scholarship foundation needed a timeline, a structure, a launch date. Stellan had sketched preliminary plans for the Greenfield Center classroom, layouts, equipment needs, staffing requirements. When should we open? I asked. December the 20th, 25. Stellan said, flipping through the calendar. Give us time to finalize everything, hire staff. Prepare facilities. He stopped on a date and tapped it with his pen. Here, December 12th, before the winter holidays. I looked at the date 1 month away, 34 years after the switch that changed everything, a lifetime of wrong corrected in the space of a few months. A second birthday, Stellan said quietly, a new beginning. I realized then that we weren't just planning an opening ceremony. We were planning the moment our real lives would finally start. The next 2 months passed in planning meetings, contractor calls, permit approvals, and equipment orders. Stellan flew between Greenfield and Orlando twice a week, coordinating between the two centers, while I handled financing and legal structures. By early December, the Sterling Scholarship Center was ready. December 12th, 2025. The opening. Stellan adjusted the silver bracelet on his wrist, the one engraved with AS, while I touched the vintage watch in my pocket. We stood outside the center 2 hours before the ceremony, watching the morning sun reflect off the glass facade. You're wearing the watch, Stellan said. I pulled it from my pocket and fastened it around my wrist. And you're wearing the bracelet. Evidence becomes memory. He nodded. Years ago, everything went wrong. Today, we make it right. The building had been purchased with proceeds from selling the ranch mansion, nearly $2 million after closing costs. Renovations took another $800,000. The result was a bright, accessible facility with specialized equipment for children with disabilities, adaptive technology, sensory rooms, physical therapy, spaces, libraries designed for every learning style. Families began arriving at 10:30. Parents with special needs, children, teachers from local schools, community members who'd heard about the center through social media and news coverage. I stood near the entrance, watching Stellan greet each family personally. Mrs. Riddle Clover looks wonderful today, he said to a woman holding the hand of a 7-year-old girl with bright red hair. Clover beamed up at him. Mr. Stellan, I wore my best dress. I can see that. You look beautiful. He moved to the next family, then the next, knowing each child's name, each parent's concern, each specific challenge they faced. He knew every single child by name. I watched him work the crowd with natural grace, not the performative charm Desmond had mastered, but genuine connection born from years of showing up, listening, caring. This is what I do, he'd said when I'd asked if he was nervous about the opening. This is who I am. By 11:45, nearly 200 people filled the courtyard. A small podium stood near the entrance, draped with a red ribbon waiting to be cut. Orlando Mayor Patricia Holloway approached the microphone at noon precisely. She was in her late 50s, wearing a navy suit, her voice carrying easily across the crowd. This center represents our community's commitment to every child, she said, regardless of ability, background, or circumstance. The Sterling Scholarship Center will provide educational support, therapeutic services, and family resources, completely free of charge, thanks to generous funding from anonymous donors who believed in this mission. She didn't name me. I'd asked her not to. This wasn't about my legacy, it was about Stellan's work. The mayor handed ceremonial scissors to Stellan. He stepped forward, positioned the blades around the ribbon, and cut. The ribbon fell away, and the crowd applauded. Clover Riddle broke from her mother's hand and ran to Stellan, wrapping her arms around his waist. Mr. Stellan, can I see my new classroom? Stellan laughed and picked her up. Of course, Clover. Let's all go see it together. But first he set her down gently and returned to the microphone. The crowd quieted. I want to say something, Stellan began. His voice was steady calm. This center exists because someone I recently came to know believed the most important investment is in a child the world has underestimated. He was right. He paused, looking out at the families. Someone did that for me once, believed in me when others didn't. My adoptive parents who raised me with love, even though I wasn't theirs by blood. My biological father, who found me after 35 years, and chose to see who I'd become, rather than mourn who I never was. Teachers who saw potential instead of limitation. Watching Stellan speak about underestimated children, I realized he wasn't talking about his students. He was talking about himself and about me believing in him. Every child here deserves that same belief, he continued. That's what this center promises. Not just education or therapy or resources, but the fundamental belief that you matter, that you're capable, that you're worth the investment. I stood at the back of the crowd, my vision blurring. My eyes turned red. I didn't wipe the tears away. This moment, watching my son speak with quiet authorities and genuine compassion, was worth every dollar spent, every year lost, every pain endured. He stepped away from the microphone to sustained applause, and families began moving toward the entrance. Stellan led the tour personally, Clover holding his left hand, a 9-year-old boy named Indy Platt holding his right. "Is this really all for us, Mr. Stellan?" Indy asked, eyes wide at the library filled with adaptive books and technology. "It's all for you," Stellan said. "Every room, every book, every toy." Clover squeezed his hand. "You're the best teacher in the whole world." Two children holding Stellan's hands, leading him through the center like he was theirs and he was. I followed at a distance, watching him in his element, patient with every question, kind in every interaction, completely present with each child, making them feel seen in ways Desmond never had, with anyone. The ceremony lasted until 3 in the afternoon. Families explored children, played parents, asked questions about enrollment and services. Stellan answered every inquiry with the detailed knowledge of someone who'd spent 35 years in this exact work. When the last family left, he found me sitting on a bench near the sensory garden. "Thank you," he said simply. "You built this," I replied. "I just paid for the walls." "You believed it mattered? That's what built it." 1 week later, sitting in my Orlando office, I received an email from Serenity Shores Rehabilitation Center in Malibu, California. Subject: gratitude from Serenity Shores. Dear anonymous donor, we wanted to express our deepest gratitude for your generous contribution to our program. Your support made it possible for a patient to complete our full 90-day residential treatment program when financial constraints would have forced early departure. We cannot share patient details, but we can tell you this: your investment in recovery may have saved a life. Thank you for believing in second chances. With gratitude, Dr. Monica Reeves, Director. I read it twice. Desmond had finished the program, 90 days, still trying to become something better than what he'd been. I deleted the email without responding. Anonymous meant anonymous. But I forwarded it to Stellan with one line: "Some people are still trying to become who they should have been." His reply came 3 minutes later. "Then we did the right thing for everyone." I realized then that mercy wasn't just about Desmond. It was about teaching my son that redemption is possible, even for the people who hurt you most. The lesson Stellan took from that email exchange stayed with me for weeks. Mercy without recognition. Redemption without audience. The word anonymous meant more to me than Desmond would ever know. It meant I was finally learning to be a father without needing applause. 3 weeks after the Scholarship Center opening, I stood alone on the Caldwell Ranch veranda, thinking about what it means to be a father to 2 sons, one who earned the title, one who lost it, both deserving mercy in different measures. True fatherhood, I'd come to understand, wasn't about biology or legal documents or inheritance plans. It was about showing up when no one was watching, giving when no one would thank you, believing in someone's capacity to become better, even when they'd given you every reason to stop. I'd never given Desmond that kind of fatherhood. I'd given him money, opportunity, my name, but not the quiet, unglamorous work of actually seeing who he was and helping him become something more. With Stellan, I was getting a second chance to understand what I'd missed the first time. Stellan's truck pulled up the gravel drive at 4 in the afternoon. He'd flown in from Orlando that morning, rented a vehicle at the Austin airport, and driven the hour and a half to the ranch. This was his first real visit, not to pack boxes or prepare for sale, but simply to see the place where I'd built my life. He stepped out and stood at the main entrance, taking in the 800 acres of Texas Hill country spreading out before him. Wind turbines dotted the landscape like sentinels, their blades turning slowly against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. "I've never seen this much land that belonged to one family," he said. "It belongs to the wind, really," I replied. We just borrow it and try to make it useful. He smiled at that. Show me everything. I want to see it all. We started with the original turbine I'd built in 1991, the year after he was born. It still stood on the eastern edge of the property, smaller than the modern units, but still functional. The paint had faded to a dull gray, and the blades moved with a rhythmic creak that the newer turbines didn't make. I built that turbine the year after you were born, 1991, I said. I should have been building it for you. Stellan reached out and touched the metal base, feeling the vibration of the spinning mechanism above. You were, he said quietly. You just didn't know it yet. That's generous of you to say. It's true. Every choice you made led here, to this moment, to us standing together. We walked past the stables, the equipment barn, the fields where I'd first tested my theories about sustainable energy in Texas. I told him stories about the early days failed, turbines that collapsed in storms, skeptical investors who said wind energy was a fantasy, the first successful contract that proved everyone wrong. Stellan asked detailed questions about engineering specifications, energy output calculations, maintenance protocols. Not because he planned to run the wind operation, he'd already made clear his life was in education, but because he wanted to understand who I was and how I thought. What made you believe wind energy would work when everyone said it wouldn't? He asked. I watched the grass bend for 30 years, I said. The wind never stopped. Why shouldn't we use it? He laughed. That's practical poetry. I like that. How many years had I walked this land wondering what legacy I'd leave, never knowing my real legacy was walking beside me now, asking questions I'd waited 35 years to answer. We continued past the north pasture where I'd once considered raising cattle before realizing wind was more profitable and less trouble. Past the creek that ran dry in summer but flooded in spring. Past the old fence line that marked the original 20 acres I'd bought in 1989 before expanding to the full 800. As the sun began to set, we returned to the main house and sat on the veranda overlooking the entire property. The wind turbines turned slowly in the golden light, their shadows stretching long across the grass. Stellan was quiet for a long time, just watching. I didn't fill the silence. Some moments need space to breathe. Finally he spoke. Is this where you grew up? No, I said. I bought this at 32. This is where I became who I am. He nodded slowly. There's a difference, isn't there, between where you start and where you become yourself? A big difference. Another silence fell between us, this one deeper. The sun touched the horizon, turning the sky orange and purple. Wind moved through the grass like a whisper, the sound I'd listened to for 37 years without ever getting tired of it. Stellan took a breath. Then quietly, but clearly, he said one word. Dad. I didn't turn to look at him. My throat tightened. I reached over and placed my hand on his shoulder once, briefly, then let go. Thank you, I said after a moment. For what? For giving me a second chance to get it right. One word. One syllable. Dad. It weighed more than every asset I owned, every contract I'd signed, every empire I'd built. We sat together as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Not talking much, just being father and son in the way we'd never had the chance to be before. I thought about all the years I'd sat on this veranda alone, or with the wrong person beside me. Now finally I was sitting with the right one. The wait had been worth it. Do you think Desmond will ever find this kind of peace? Stellan asked into the darkness. I thought about the rehab center in California, the anonymous check, the email thanking us for helping a patient complete treatment. I thought about a man trying to become better than he'd been working through whatever demons had driven him to cruelty and arrogance. I hope so, I said. Every son deserves a chance to find out who they really are. Stellan was quiet for a moment. Even the ones who aren't really sons, especially those, I answered. Because mercy, I've learned, isn't about who deserves it. It's about who you become when you give it anyway. As the Texas sun set over 800 acres of wind and grass, Stellan's single word dad hung in the air between us, earned not through blood or law, but through choice time and the slow work of becoming family. That conversation about mercy stayed with me long after Stellan drove back to the airport. He had a week of classes starting Monday at the Sterling Center. 23 students enrolled with another 40 on the waiting list. He'd said goodbye with a hand on my shoulder and a quiet, "See you soon, Dad." The words still felt new, still carried weight I wasn't used to carrying. Now it was just me morning coffee on the ranch veranda, alone with my thoughts and the endless Texas wind. The same veranda where Stellan had called me Dad 2 days ago, now quiet again but no longer lonely. There's a difference between solitude and loneliness. I was learning to tell them apart. I kept wondering what Vera Lockwood was afraid of, what made her choose silence over truth for 35 years. The answer, when it finally came to me, was painful in its simplicity. She was afraid I'd be disappointed, that I'd built my life on perfection summa, cum laude, flawless business execution empire, built from nothing and couldn't tolerate a son with disabilities. She thought I'd reject Stellan, or worse, accept him with the kind of cold obligation that destroys a child's spirit. She was wrong about my capacity for love, but maybe she was right about the man I'd been 35 years ago. The man who measured success by quarterly returns, who valued efficiency over compassion, who built an empire that demanded perfection from everyone who entered it. I'd created an environment where imperfection felt intolerable, where Desmond learned that love came with conditions, that approval had to be earned through achievement, that being my son meant being flawless. No wonder Desmond became what he became. No wonder Vera chose silence. Vera's silence was a wall built brick by brick. From my own expectations, she didn't hide the truth from me. She hid it from the man she thought I was. The profound irony settled over me like morning fog. Vera had feared I'd be disappointed by Stellan, but Stellan was the only son who'd never disappointed me. Desmond, the perfect one with the flawless grades and athletic trophies, and corporate ambition brought only arrogance, cruelty, and the kind of emptiness that comes from chasing achievement without purpose. Stellan, the imperfect one with the limp and the special education career and the modest Greenfield apartment, brought dignity, service, genuine love, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing your worth isn't measured by what you accumulate. Perfection was never where I thought it was. My phone buzzed. A message from Stellan sent from Orlando, a photo attached. I opened it and saw Clover Riddle walking the parallel bars at Sterling Center. Her face showed fierce determination, small hands gripping the bars with white knuckles, feet moving independently, left, right, down the length of the equipment. A physical therapist stood nearby but wasn't touching her. Clover was doing it alone. The caption read, "She did it again, faster this time." I stared at the photo for a long moment, then typed back, "Good. Don't let her slow down." His reply came immediately, "Never? That's not how we do things here." I set the phone down and looked out at the ranch. 800 acres of Texas hill country. 27 wind turbines turning slowly against the morning sky. Caldwell Energy Solutions with its Orlando headquarters and its multi-million-dollar contracts and its position as a regional leader in sustainable energy. All of it, every acre and dollar and achievement, suddenly meant less than that single photo of a 7-year-old girl walking parallel bars. That's what legacy truly means. Not the empire you build, or the money you accumulate, or the name you make famous. Legacy is what your son builds with the resources you provided. Legacy is Clover Riddle taking steps everyone said she'd never take. Legacy is believing in the underestimated when the world has given up. I'd spent 61 years building the wrong things. Now finally I was building the right ones through Stellan, through the Scholarship Center, through anonymous checks to rehab facilities, through mercy, given without expectation of return. The morning passed into afternoon. I worked through emails, reviewed a contract proposal for wind farm expansion in West Texas, approved budget allocations for the Orlando office. Business as usual, but it felt different now, lighter somehow, because the work served something beyond itself. Every dollar generated could fund another scholarship, another accessible classroom, another child's chance to exceed the world's low expectations. As the sun began to set, I returned to the veranda with the same coffee cup, now cold and empty. I didn't refill it, just held it and watched the light change across the land I'd worked for 37 years. The vintage watch on my wrist caught the dying sun, the one engraved with A.S., found by a nurse 35 years ago, worn by Stellan. His entire life then returned as evidence of a truth I'd spent months uncovering. Now worn again as a symbol of connection, of circles closing, of things finding their way home. The sunset light caught the crystal and scattered gold across my hand. The watch on my wrist caught the light, and 35 years collapsed into a single moment of recognition I was finally wearing the right time. I touched the crystal, feeling the smooth surface warm from my skin in the Texas sun. I thought about journeys and destinations, about the difference between what we plan and what we receive, about the grace of getting a second chance when you don't deserve it. Some things travel 35 years through hospitals and lies and loneliness to find their way home. The watch, the smile that matched mine, the son who should have grown up here but didn't, who became someone better because of the detour, who returned, not to claim what was stolen, but to build something new. God's timing is never wrong, just never when you expect it. The journey was over. I was home. Tomorrow Stellan would call and ask about wind turbine maintenance schedules, not because he needed to know, but because he wanted to learn. Next week, another photo of Clover would arrive showing more progress. Next month, the Scholarship Center would accept its 100th student. The work would continue. The legacy would grow. But tonight, on this veranda, watching the watch catch the dying light, I finally understood what it means to be a father, not the man who builds empires, but the man who believes in children. The world has underestimated, including the son who took 35 years to find his way home. And to you listening to my story, remember this family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by the choices we make when everything falls apart. I spent 35 years building an empire of perfection, demanding excellence from everyone. Don't make my mistake. I created an environment where Vera felt she had to hide the truth, where Desmond learned that love was conditional. If I'd focused less on building wealth and more on relationships, maybe everything would have been different. What I learned through this family betrayal revenge story is that mercy isn't weakness. It's the hardest kind of strength. When I discovered the dad revenge family truth, I could have walked away from both sons. But God showed me something crucial. Redemption is possible even for those who hurt you most. Stellan entered my life not to replace what I lost, but to teach me what fatherhood truly means. Real legacy isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the children you believe in. If this dad revenge family story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear about family betrayal, revenge and redemption. What would you have done, shown mercy, or walked away? Drop a comment below, and if you haven't subscribed to Dad's Sweet Revenge yet, I'd be honored to have you join us. Thank you for staying until the very end. I read every comment, and your perspectives matter. While this journey includes fictionalized elements for storytelling, the core message about mercy, redemption, and fatherhood is what I hope stays with you long after this story ends.